Hi, I'm Niall Paterson. Welcome to the Sky News Daily. And I have to say, I'm feeling pretty refreshed. I got to enjoy a bank holiday Monday out of the office. A very peaceful bank holiday Monday, in fact, which is rare because I happen to live not too far from the Heathrow flight path. In fact, it was only when a friend started moaning about his trip today being cancelled that I realised that there had been far fewer planes disturbing our time in the beer garden than you would have expected. By now, you will have heard why. What's been described as a technical fault in the air traffic control system led to flights being delayed and cancelled, and passengers left stranded at airports around the world. What on earth could have brought the usually pretty efficient UK airspace to its knees? Let's find out. I'm joined by the Independent's travel editor, Simon Calder, and former air traffic controller, Michele Robson. Great to have you both on. I mean, Simon, we started to know that there was a bit of an issue yesterday morning. It got pretty bad, though, didn't it?
It was absolutely awful. By midnight on Monday night, I had counted over 1,200 cancellations, affecting about 200,000 people. But then when the final scores came in on Tuesday morning, it was clear that actually the number was north of 1,500 flight cancellations, an extraordinary number, which basically meant that 250,000 people woke up where they didn't want or need to be. We haven't seen anything on this scale, I'm afraid, since the Icelandic volcano in 2010.
Explain then, Simon, exactly why the effects of this are still being felt right now.
I first heard about it at 11:19. It was not till 3:15, so almost 4 hours later, that the system was back up and running. Unfortunately, because there is so little slack in the system, particularly at this time of year, with so many people wanting particularly to fly back from Mediterranean locations, there's just no space for problems. Once things start going wrong, then they unravel very, very quickly because you've got aircraft, you've got pilots, you've got cabin crew in the wrong places. They're running out of hours. We woke up this morning with dozens of planes in the wrong airports, and that takes an awful lot of recovery.
The two biggest airports, Heathrow and Gatwick, were clearly always going to be really terribly affected. But airports up and down the country were going to be having problems yesterday, weren't they?
We saw the most cancellations at Heathrow and Gatwick, closely followed by Manchester Airport, also Luton, Edinburgh, badly affected. The airlines are going to be furious at the losses, which I calculate on the back of a boarding pass to be about £80 million. And that's in terms of lost revenue, in terms of the duty of care that they have. So there's going to be some interesting conversations between the airlines and NATS, the air traffic provider.
How well did the airlines handle this? Because, of course, when things go wrong, it's not immediately the Civil Aviation Authority they turn to, or even National Air Traffic Service. It's the airlines themselves.
The airlines have an absolute strict and well-known obligation to look after you. Your flight is cancelled. They have to find you accommodation. They have to find you a place on the next available flight, even if it means paying hundreds of pounds to arrival. They have to provide you with your meals. Having said all of that, there will be an awful lot of people who say, well, hang on, we didn't get any of that. We've had the Prime Minister and the Transport Secretary saying, oh, these are your rights. And the airlines just don't have the systems in place. They don't have the people at the airports. And there really needs to be a complete reassessment of how well the airlines look after their passengers when things, as they say in the industry, go tango uniform.
Indeed. Michele, to bring you in at this point, look, first and foremost, tell us about your troubles yesterday. You were over in, I think it was Jersey.
I was due to fly back at lunchtime yesterday, at exactly the time where it all started to go horribly wrong. I believe that the system failed earlier in the morning, but because they have backups in place, nobody actually realised for quite a few hours. And then as they were looking to go manual, obviously that's when the delays started. Suddenly they rushed us out to the plane to get on. In between that, we also had an evacuation of the terminal just to add to the fun for the day. It was one of those days where I thought, is someone playing a joke? And then we all got on the plane. But unfortunately, we were there for about 4 hours in total. And then we eventually got a slot. But at that point, the toilets weren't working. So everybody quickly rushed off to back to the terminal briefly because they couldn't fix it in time for the slot, and then got back on and off we went. We were around about 4.5 hours late. So I count myself as incredibly fortunate compared with all those other people. I had two friends that were there at the same time as me, booked a couple of hours after me, and they basically got told they would be there till at least Thursday. So they've had to get a ferry back.
I will confess, my knowledge of what exactly has happened here is pretty minimal. Let me just read you that which seems to be the line that has been put out by NATS, the National Air Traffic Service. Technical failure meant air traffic controllers could no longer automatically process flight plans. Look, Michele, given that my knowledge of air traffic control is limited to watching the movie Airplane, explain exactly what that sentence means.
There's a flight planning system that both the Scottish Centre in Prestwick and the London Centre, which is down in Swanwick near Southampton, use to get all the information on flights. So controllers have a radar in front of them, and they need to know which plane is which. They need to know what the flight number is, what the aircraft type is, so they can separate them properly, and they need to know where they're going and what route they're taking. So they need all that information in front of them on the screen, and they also have electronic strips. So to get that information, normally it's all transferred electronically. Most of the airlines have bulk plans because obviously they fly the same plans all summer, and that will just automatically go into the system. Now, unfortunately, what happened is there was a complete failure of this flight planning system, and they do have a backup, as I mentioned, which runs for about 4 hours worth of data. Once it gets to the end of those 4 hours, they need to switch to a manual system, and they will normally make the decision quite a time in advance, at which point they start putting on these zero rates you may have heard of, which basically means that anything in the sky carries on, because obviously can't really stop that. You don't want to divert things, but anything already on the ground like we were will just sit there, and then they will go into a manual state. The controllers see a similar display to what they would have been seeing before, but a lot of things have to be done manually, such as coordinating with other centres and controllers. There'd be more phone calls, and then the people behind the scenes would be working extremely hard, putting every single flight plan in individually. So you can imagine how long that takes.
But absent that information, so you've just got dots on a screen and you don't know who they are. Is it that simple?
If we didn't have manual flight plans put in, you would not know all the details on the flight. So controllers couldn't control safely. So there's no other option but to get someone to do that manually.
When we're putting this information in manually, I mean, literally, again, is that someone sitting at a PC with a keyboard inputting data that has been, faxed over to them, sent over by electronic mail, something like that?
It's literally the air traffic control assistants and the flight planning department will be sitting there entering all the different fields into the flight planning system. So it is that simple. These will all be coming in from the adjacent centres in the airlines. Obviously, it gets particularly worse because at that point they're all refiling because everything's delayed and cancelled. So it makes it even more complicated.
What then of the reports doing the rounds at the moment that a badly filed flight plan from a French airline somehow brought the entire system to its knees? I mean, first, explain whether or not that is possible, and second, what that means.
When there have been failures in the past, it's normally something to do with a bad information that's been input in the incorrect format. It's a very old system. It's been running for many years, and generally, we've been very lucky. We don't often have failures, or if we do, we get it back during that backup time, which is what it's there for. But there have been other instances in the past where something's been incorrectly formatted and the flight plan computer behaves in a way they're not expecting, and it effectively causes it to fail. So it is a potential possibility. What they're saying could be true. That could be enough to potentially crash the system, in effect, if it was formatted incorrectly.
We use an awful lot of technology here at Sky, and sometimes if you put special characters into the box where you're supposed to be putting text, it can make lots of funny things appear on screen. Thankfully, it doesn't really happen very often, but is that what you're talking about? Something as simple as that could have brought the whole system down?
You have to space things in a certain way using a certain number of dots as an example, and things like that if people don't do it, and they do it in a very unique way that's never been done before, obviously, because otherwise it would happen every day. So it has to be something, pretty unusual that they've input for it to happen. But it's an old system that perhaps something was input yesterday that it's never seen before, and that's what caused it to obviously have this reaction where it's failed.
I mean, Simon, this feels like an appropriate point to bring you back in. I mean, can you believe this?
No, my jaw is dropping more and more and more the more we're hearing about this. You cannot just allow somebody to put in some completely random information and say, oh, don't like that, and now we're going to shut the whole system down. It's most definitely, I think we're much more likely to be talking about foul up rather than foul play in this. But it sounds as though you wouldn't even actually have to be a particularly good hacker to bring the whole thing to its knees if a badly written flight plan is able to do it for you.
And obviously, we should point out, again, Michele is here to give us the benefit of her more than 2 decades of experience, certainly not to act as an advocate or in defence of the National Air Traffic Services. But Simon, given that which we've just heard, there are going to be an awful lot of questions for NATS. I mean, I suggest that if the system is as capable of falling over from one single input, then there will be significant questions asked about backups, safeties, and whether or not there needs to be a move to another system at some point where this doesn't happen.
I think it's fair to say that safety was never, ever an issue on this. And the UK, quite rightly, has an extremely good reputation for good air traffic control. But yes, I mean, this is sounding like one of those legacy IT systems where it's basically sellotape and string have been applied rather than the kind of 21st century systems that you would expect. I'm not an IT expert. I'm certainly not an air traffic control expert. But if it is the case that, and from what we were hearing, it's a regular occurrence, somebody feeds in some nonsense and the system doesn't automatically just spit it out and say, have another go, pal. That's really, really concerning. And the 4 hours that it took to fix this problem, that is really worrying as well, because, of course, every single minute compounds the chaos at Britain's airports.
Thanks, Simon. Well, in just a moment, we'll be taking a look at what those inconvenienced passengers can actually do and just how long we might expect the problems to continue. Stay where you are. Huge problems at airports around the country and elsewhere from what may well turn out to be just a single piece of badly formatted data placed into the system. Michele, I suppose what this demonstrates, though, is the need for human beings to still be at the heart of air traffic control. The idea that this process could ever be fully automated would have, well, puts people into a state of panic, I'd say. Frankly, though, things would not have been back up and running if it hadn't been for the human touch.
Oh, absolutely. And they're very highly trained. I think that's worth pointing out. They have a lot of training before they even start, both on a simulator and live with a mentor. So most of the people, have got huge amounts of experience and they're very calm under pressure, as you have to be. So they're used to being put in pressurized situations and recovering it. And I think sort of building on Simon's point, it's worth just saying that 99.9% of the time when you do input something incorrectly, it will spit it out and say there's an error here. But in very rare circumstances, this is the first time in about a decade we've had any sort of major issue like this, then something that it hasn't seen before and doesn't recognise can cause a major issue like we've seen. But fortunately, that is very rare. And they do have this 4-hour backup, which is what it's there for. Normally, we'd expect them to have, simply gone, yes, we've identified it and it'd be back up and running. Nobody would have even known if they'd done it in the initial 4 hours before we heard of the major failure. It could have been far worse if they don't have the backups in place.
Those days when, not when things went wrong, but when, there were more planes in the air than there should have been, or there were issues. I mean, how did you cope with that? Were those the days that you look back on and remember most fondly? I mean, are those the days that you wish you could forget?
You are trained not to find it stressful. You're obviously always going to have a reaction. But I think those days, actually, when it's busy and things are going on, in some ways, controllers thrive on it. That's what we're trained for, to cope with these busy situations. So, the good thing is you go home at the end of that sort of day and you might kind of think about it for a bit, but you leave it behind. It's not like most jobs where you're taking it home with you. And when you go back the next day, hopefully everything's back to normal and you just start again. So, and we will have great support as well. They have trained people that will, if you've had an incident of some sort and you need some help, they're actually available in the centre to help you through it. So you do get a lot of help with these things.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Simon, just back to you, because of course these travel problems are continuing. Walk us through the advice for the consumer in situations such as this, because, I mean, technically, the airlines are not at fault, so seeking compensation from the airlines, I mean, that's a non-starter, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And actually, I think perhaps if you've got one or two keen lawyers who are stranded in various parts of the Mediterranean, it might well be that they will have a look and wonder if there's potential for a claim for not conducting the business of air traffic control with reasonable care and skill. I'll just put that out there. I don't know if it would happen. And the airlines, of course, £80 million in damage that's being caused to them, they are really having a horrible time, because as soon as a flight is cancelled, they have to provide the hotel, they have to provide meals, they have to provide a flight as early as possible, possibly even on another airline, or indeed, as we heard, people coming back from Jersey on a ferry. They need to pay for that. It's extremely expensive. They're certainly not going to be handing out any compensation on top of that. And unfortunately, time and again, with these with disruption, of course, we've not seen anything on this scale for a while. The airlines have this obligation to provide hotels and meals and alternative flights, but all too often they don't seem to be able to deliver it when called upon.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've heard you speak in the past about this, and in fact, I think it's something you've raised directly with the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority. So what is the advice then to passengers who did not receive a hotel, who did not receive their vouchers for food and drink? Well, basically just hold on to your receipts, I suppose.
If the airline does not meet its duty of care, then you find the cheapest reasonable hotel that you can, and you eat modestly, and obviously don't claim for any drinks. You're going to need, by the way, itemised receipts in order to claim those back. And if there's an alternative flight that is going to get you back before the first available flight on the airline you're travelling with, the airline also has to pay for that. The trouble is, of course, that not everybody has a platinum grade credit card, and they, if you've been having a lovely holiday, you're expecting to go home, you've spent all your money, you could be absolutely flummoxed. And the Civil Aviation Authority wrote to all the airlines a year ago and said, you've really got to look after people in that position. And I'm not seeing much evidence that they are.
And Sam, just finally, when do we think that all the problems in the system will have worked their way through?
I think we will be back to something like normal service on Friday, which is just as well, because that's going to be a monumentally busy weekend. We might actually see in the next couple of days some rescue flights going on, particularly to bring people back from locations such as Turkey and the Canary Islands, where you've got an awful lot of people out of position being told things like, we can't get you back for a week. So, Wednesday, Thursday to try to clear up some of the backlog, and then into normal service over the weekend. But there's going to be, I think, a lot of people kind of not straggling back till maybe Sunday.
It has been absolutely fantastic to talk to you both on this excellent advice from both and insight from both angles. Michele Robson, Simon Calder, many thanks for being on The Daily. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is your lot for this edition of The Daily. We'll see you next time.